To this webinar showing you the latest Symbio highlights. In front of you on the Symbio start page you see various new features we have, and going from left to right I'm going to show you how each feature looks like and what benefit you have and how it works in Symbio. So let's start from left to right. You see there's a feature called View Process Matrix. So that means when we dive into a sub-process, there's a additional view you have. Let's just go into a process, and you see here on the toolbar under graphic you can go for process matrix, and here you see a compact overview of all process tasks, including the connections, the associated systems, roles, etc. And as before, when you select one process task, you see the detail content on the right automatically populates, showing associated data. So that's a new view you have. It's just applicable for sub-processes, and you retrieve it via the toolbar graphic. Let's go back to the start page. Then we have a feature called Workflow for Request. So far a feedback was sent directly to the process author, and then he or she just integrated into the process, creating a new process version. Now we have a release cycle included, meaning you need to get the feedback approved before you integrate it into a new process version. So it works as follows. Let's just go into a process. Let's use the previous one again. I'm just going to update the view to the vertical view, and let's go to a version which is in process. So let's just summarize who's involved here. You see here on the right under responsibilities, the process author is Paul Manager, the quality manager is Michael Quality, and the responsible is Peter Process. And now the owner of the process can just request a new content which should be integrated into the current process, and you can do that by going to the toolbar request. Then a new dialog opens. Then you can just specify the feedback, so it could be whatever, a change request, the urgency could be normal, and the desired response date should be this Friday the 28th. And the title could be, for example, new role added. And then here in this field you can just write in maybe your explanation why a new role should be added. So any kind of content can be filled here into this field. For example, new role added to process task. And then by clicking OK, a workflow is started. And now this request is going to the quality manager, which is Michael Quality here. So let's just log off as Paul Manager and log on as Michael Quality, because now in the background a task was sent to the task board of Michael Quality and also an email simultaneously. And let's just now go into the task board of this Michael Quality. You see here under info a new info was added, so it's a request. It's concerning a feedback. The associated element is new role added, created by Paul Manager and just sent a minute ago, as you can see. And via the detail content, by clicking on this hyperlink, you can just get an overview of the whole request. You see here the state, for example, an event log was created where you see the history. So at the moment it is assigned to the quality manager. The associated process is idea innovation. So via the hyperlink you can also dive into the graph, just checking the logic and all associated process data. And at the bottom you see all persons involved. So let's just assume this feedback is kind of okay and it is logic, it makes sense. So that means the quality manager can approve it. And also here you can just write in something into this field like approved. And then when you click OK, this kind of release cycle goes on, and now the responsible, who is Peter Process, is receiving a task and an email. So let's just log off as Michael Quality and log on as Peter Process. And when we go into this info board, you see this feedback task again, and now the same principle applies. All data can be checked, and then finally it can be approved. And when that's done, you see here now in the history it is approved, and now the process author, who is Paul Manager, can also check his info board, and now you see here also that person is constantly informed about the state of the whole release cycle of the feedback. And the latest one is obviously the final approval from the responsible, and now the feedback can be integrated. So in summary, when requesting a feedback or when requesting a optimization suggestion, it just follows a release cycle, and it needs to be approved by the quality manager and the responsible. Let's go back to the start page. The next feature is the subscription and the favorite function. So that means when you subscribe for a particular set of data, you are informed by email when a new version is created. So let's just look like how it can look in praxis. You can go to the repository, you select a particular role, for example, head of department, and then in the toolbar you just click on the I, and when that's done, you see here on the very top right beside your username, you see the star, and now under in the subscription tab you see this role, head of department, was added. And now you can imagine when you add, say, 7 or 8 roles or input outputs, you just have a list here of all your subscribed data sets, and then you can dive into this particular data by just using the list here you have then. And the same is with the favorites. Let's just maybe go into a process. Exactly, let's stay with this one. And when you want to define a process as your favorite, you just click on the star here in the toolbar, and then a favorite is defined. And it works the same way as with the subscribe data. You see here now in the favorite tab, you see this process idea innovation was added. Okay, so it gives you a nice overview of all your favorite processes or roles, for example, and all your subscribed processes and inputs, for example. Moving on, let's talk about the copying of processes. So far in Symbio, you were able to copy, for example, a process task and move it or paste it into a just other position into the same process. Now you can copy or move a huge content of a process and pasting it or moving it into a completely different process. So let's just maybe create a new process in the architecture. For example, under core processes, let's just add a sub-process which is called copy process. Let's just add it. And then let's go into an existing process, for example this one. And let's just now copy a few elements. Say the first 6 or 7. Then you go to copy in the toolbar, copy to, then a dialog opens with your whole process architecture, and then you select the relevant process, which is in this case the process I just created, copy process. When you select it, you see you are automatically navigated to this process in the architecture. You see here on the top left, we are now working in the process copy process, and you see the copied elements are now part of this new process. Okay, so that's how it works. You just use the toolbar, copy, and then copy to, and then a dialog opens giving you an overview of all your processes. Going back to the overview, the HTML editor, you might have seen it already. So let's go maybe into a guideline or a document. So you see when I just set up a new guideline, for example, a communication guideline, you see here now in the detail content on the right, you have this description, and you can just use the standard formatting you are familiar with. So the bold, italic, underline writing, headers, numerations, indenting, outdenting can be managed. You can define a link, or you can upload a picture, for example. And that description field is applicable for data objects or processes, or also in the dialogues when you, for example, send a request or a feedback. And it always follows the same principle. So you have the description field numerous times in Symbio. Going on. Now let's talk about setting up your start page. So one basic thing is the start page is managed by an administrator, meaning you need to have administrator competencies in order to edit a start page or in order to set up a start page from scratch. So let's just maybe log on as an administrator. So now I'm an administrator, and by the way, you see here my competencies, so I have administrator rights. And now you see on the bottom right a kind of pen where you can dive into the editing mode of your start page. And as you can see, the start page consists of different widgets. So let's just go into this editing mode. You see here via new, you can just add different widgets like a table or a diagram widget, meaning you have the freedom to set up the start page according to your requirements and according to your needs. So let's just show you briefly how to amend a existing widget. Let's go, for example, to the organization widget. When you click on it, you see on the right in the detail content the data you can maintain. For example, the size you can amend. You see here when I update the width from 1 to 2, you see now the widget is now wider as before. Let's go back to the previous size, and also the style or the color can be amended. Crucial is the kind of data you are going to link to the widget. So you see here under facet view link settings, it goes without saying that when you have an organization widget, you would link your organizational chart. And you see here in the drop down, the organization was selected. So that means now when we go back to the start page, a front-end user would work with. And when I now click on organization, you see I'm navigated into the organization automatically from the start page. Okay, and I can also go for a graph here, for example. So that's how you amend or set up your start page. But you need to have administrator rights. So let's just log on as this Paul manager again. And let's just continue. Define your personal filter. So that's a feature where you can just narrow down the data you would like to see in the database. So it means you can narrow down your data according to the organization or according to locations, for instance. And you update that here under the settings, say where you have your username. Okay, so let's just do an example. Let's go into the IT structure. And let's just maybe set up a new building block, which could be called BPM systems. And now let's set up a system, Symbio Web, and a other system, Symbio e-learning. And now when you maintain the organization here in the detail content for a system, for example, logistics for the Symbio Web, and for the e-learning we go to the, let's say, purchasing, operative purchasing. Okay. So, and now let's update the settings here for organizations. We go for logistics, and now you probably see where I'm going. When we now go into a process, into the modeling, for example, let's stay here. We select a process task, and when we now want to link a system via the burger, list filtered, you see now the systems where we maintained logistics, that's the Symbio Web, you might remember, and all other systems where no organization is maintained at all. But you might remember for the system Symbio e-learning, we went for the operative purchasing, and we don't see that in the list because by using the parameters here, we didn't go for the purchasing, but only for logistics. Okay, so that's how you narrow down the data, and the benefit is you obviously only see data which is relevant for you. Going back to the start page, the two-tier release cycle works as follows. Let's go into maybe this process here, and let's just also add a end event. So first of all, before sending a process into release cycle, you need to make sure that you fill all the responsibilities. So the author, let's say that's this Paul manager. The quality manager is Michael Quality, and the responsible is the Peter process. And you initiate a release cycle by going to version, change state. You might want to add the start of the validity, it's today's date, and the reason for the revision, well, in this case it's the first version anyway, so let's just go for initial version, and then you click OK, and then the process, you click OK after having updated the drop down to ready for QA. And now the process, you see, is frozen. It cannot be edited anymore. And now this Michael Quality received a task and an email. So let's log on as Michael Quality. And you see also via the start page, you see here on the bottom left my task, you can navigate from the start page directly to the task board. In the detail content, via the hyperlink, you can dive into the process, just checking the logic and all associated data, and when that's fine, you accept. And now from the first tier, the release cycle goes to the second tier. So now the responsible receives a task and an email. And responsible was the Peter process. Let's do the same. You can also navigate to the task board via my task. And now you see a task from Michael Quality. And also you can check the whole process before you release and when you accept. And when we go back to the process, you see now this process is now released and has the version 1.0. So just to summarize, the author initiated the release cycle and a task was sent to the quality manager. When the quality manager approves, a task is sent to the responsible. So that's the release cycle, how it works at the moment. When you prefer to stick to the release cycle where the task is going to the responsible immediately, you would just leave the quality manager field blank. Moving forward, we have the definition of scenarios. So a scenario is a new process type you can set up in the architecture. Under a category via new, you can set up a scenario, and it could be called, for example, product creation. So you can now illustrate a end-to-end process or a value-added chain, for example. Let's just add it to the architecture. Now you see here product creation, and let's navigate into the modeling mode. Now you have a blank kind of space in front of you, and via new you would now just work with, you can also define the graph. You would just work with interface elements. Let's just set up maybe 4, for example. And now you probably see where I'm going. You use existing processes to set up this view. So when you click on interface, in the detail content on the right, you see process reference create. And then you have the process architecture in front of you, where you would just now select the relevant sub-process, for example, manage release planning. And now you see the manage release planning is the first process of this whole end-to-end process. And it goes without saying that you would just continue now selecting existing processes in order to get this kind of view growing. So the second last feature are the dependencies. Dependencies, they give you an overview. For example, let's just dive into a modeled process. In the sub-navigation, you see an additional view called dependencies, and it gives you a good overview of all data used in a process. For example, under type, you can just, for example, go for all roles you have, and then you see the roles involved with the version number and the status, for example. So it just gives you a compact and profound overview of all data used in a process. And last but not least, we have the versioning of organizational units. So it follows the same principle as the versioning of inputs, for example. Let's just show you an example. Let's dive into the organization. And when we select a organizational unit like the logistics, for example, you see in the detail content on the right the release history, and at the moment logistics has the version 3 and the previous 2 versions are expired but still part of the database. So it gives you a nice history, and you can also always check the delta between the versions. So let's just assume we update the description of this organizational unit, meaning we would just create a new version of the released version. And now you see I'm working in the version 3.1 and the state is in process. And now in the attributes, a change can be done. For example, let's change it from division to department, and then we release it again. And the reason for revision could be that the kind of was changed to department, and as you see, as the responsible is the same person as the author, the delta or the drop down can be updated to released immediately, and then a new version is created. And you see now we have the version 4.0 in the release history, and the 3 previous versions are now still visible, although they are expired. Okay, then we are done with the latest features Symbio have. I hope it was constructive for you, giving you a good overview where we are at the moment with our features. Thank you for your time and thanks for listening.